you never have an authentically black candidate. By authentically black, we're referring to like the foundational black American, which are the blacks in America who matter most. Now, of course, Jamaicans matter, Nigerians matter, Somalis matter, etc. But the blacks that are the majority in this country and the truest of Americans, and what I mean by the truest of Americans is that, say, unlike the Italians or the Germans or the others who came through Ellis Island as immigrants, still holding on to their culture, folkways, religion, mores, etc., the foundational black American was recreated in this land with the new founding of a country called the United States of America. Everything that they know, they pretty much know from this land. Their religion, they learned their Christianity here in this land. Their language, they learned here in this land. Their folkways, their mores come from this land. In fact, the name of their ethnicity, African American, foundational Black American, whatever you want to call it, it came from this land. Whereas you see the whites in the Midwest, the Germans, they come from Germany, or the folks in Pennsylvania who speak Pennsylvania Dutch. It comes from Europe. There's nothing that anyone can say that they have that came from the United States of America, meaning that new country. Now, people are like, Marquette, what about the Native Americans? Well, they predate America. They're not even Native Americans. Like, they're from a place that predates America. That's different. And furthermore, they've unfortunately been decimated and then marginalized onto reservations. Their culture predates the United States of America, and it has gone on with some level of continuity. So that's different. But the Black American, or the foundational Black American, they were created in America. Even the founders of the American nation state were subjects of the British crown, whereas those who were enslaved came here and got their culture fully from America. Those who came here, the Europeans who even brought the Africans, enslaved Africans here, they got their culture from Britain or wherever they came from. So that's an important distinction. So anyways, just a little bit of relevant history. And I say that to say, because people often talk about, like, the Democratic Party was founded by the KKK, or like, you got to get off the plantation. It's like all of these allusions to slavery or enslavement really are irrelevant, because both of the parties are deeply racist and discriminatory. And when I say discriminatory, I mean they discriminate against authentically Black persons with authentically Black culture. None of the persons who operate within these parties would we as urban Blacks recognize, in as much as they're just performing an identity. Barack Obama grew up in Hawaii. What N words from Hawaii? You're be like, can somebody name a rapper from Hawaii? You guys are like, well, rappers, Marquette, that's not like the true essence of Black culture. Well, actually, it is. Actually, and most Blacks are urban Blacks, and I don't know that Hawaii has a major urban center of Blacks. It's not Detroit. It's not Atlanta. It's not Chicago. So he's performing it. He also went to private schools, grew up with his grandparents who are both white, which there's nothing wrong with that. Sounds like a nice upbringing, but it's just not a Black American upbringing. And Kamala Harris is married to a white man and has white children, which, hey, do what you do. I'm not against miscegenation. I'm not against interracial marriage or dating. But to have a woman who's part Indian and then Jamaican, which is not a foundational Black American, and then has white kids and a white husband, and then suggesting that she's like the mascot for Black women is just utterly ludicrous. But this is the Democratic Party's effort to confuse you and also to bamboozle you, and failing to find someone who's authentically Black, because someone who's authentically Black wouldn't mess with the Democrats. Someone who's authentically Black probably wouldn't mess with the Republicans. In fact, someone who's authentically conservative could mess with the Republicans. Conservatism does not condone any alternative lifestyles. Conservatism focuses on the family. That is the nuclear family. And we've gotten away from that. And recently I was thinking of, doing a video, and I may or may not ever do it, but I'll give you a little summary of what I was thinking, because when we're outside of a group, we look at that group monolithically, right? And it usually leads to racism. We all experience various forms of racism, sometimes unconsciously or accidentally. But I say that to say this: if you're a Black person, you understand the spectrum of what it is to be black. But you might look at whites and think that they're a certain way, which is to say you think in terms of stereotypes or racism, whether it's a positive or negative stereotype. And so if you're a white person, you know that there's a spectrum to being white, but you're not black. So you might look at blacks and look at them as more of a monolithic group that behaves, thinks in one way. I say that to say this. I was thinking about the history of the country, and obviously America is a white country. If someone wants to tell you America is not a white country, they're delusional. America is a white country. One, it's that's the majority population. Number two, those are the persons, the racial category that founded the country, obviously on the blood and bones of the Native Americans, but those are the ones who founded the country. It's a white country. And so I was asking myself about the good whites versus the bad whites, right? Like, were the whites always one cohesive group, or were they struggling against one another and certain elements within the white collective were dominating? And so I was thinking, I often go back to prohibition because we know that alcoholism is a terrible thing. It's a great evil. I see this acted and reenacted all the time in Las Vegas. I see it on social media. I saw a young man had basically, he was a DUI individual. He was a DUI and he had mowed someone down in his car and they died. And he felt really remorseful, but he's about to go to jail for a long time, and this is a result of alcohol. We know alcohol is a great evil. And there's another story I just saw on Twitter. A young lady, her father had beat up this dude who had taken advantage of her, who was an Uber driver. So the woman is with her girlfriends, white woman with her white girlfriends, and these are the most careless persons on earth, white females in the West. They get drunk at a party, and then they say, "Okay, you're too drunk. We're going to keep partying. We're going to call you an Uber." So they call an Uber, which is also known as a stranger. And then she gets in the car with this Uber driver, and he doesn't drive her to her destination. He types in, arrived, as though he dropped her off, and then he takes her to a secluded place, and then he begins to take advantage of her due to her being inebriated. At which point, her friends had tried to contact her and they weren't able to contact her. So they reached out to her father. Her father had the daughter's real time location. So he pulled up to the real time location, and then he was able to find the guy assaulting her. And then he, physically accosted the guy. Now, everyone on the Twitter comment was commending the father, like, "Oh, he's a hero." No, he's not a hero. He's a terrible father, actually, because if he was a father like me, his daughter wouldn't drink alcohol. If his daughter didn't drink alcohol, she wouldn't be at a party. She wouldn't be drunk. She wouldn't be in the car alone with an Uber driver, a male, and she wouldn't have been taken advantage of. So, no, he's not a great father. He's acted as a brute at the appropriate time, but he was not a great father. He failed in his chief duty of protecting and conveying values. He is one of the bad, evil, low class whites. Anyways, I say that to say this. We're talking about alcohol. So I go back to prohibition as a major splitting point in American history where you can see these are the bad whites, these are the good whites, to try to figure out who's controlling the country, right? And then I'm going to add in the slavery piece in a second, but walk with me. So when you had prohibition, you had the government being essentially ruled by good whites, those who are reasonably moral and religious and want to guide the country in a positive trajectory and protect people from themselves, which is to say there are a number of known harmful things: alcoholism, gambling, promiscuity, overeating, things like that, right? So the government tried to protect people from themselves. The Korean government does it today. You cannot gamble in Korea if you're Korean. You could do it if you're a foreigner. Also, if you're in Dubai, you can't even do video calls on Instagram. You cannot watch adult content in Qatar or Saudi. They protect you from yourself because these things are filthy and demonic and dangerous. So I say that to say the American government tried to do the same thing. But you had the evil whites, the Kennedy family, for example, famous bootleggers, and then Al Capone, the Italian gangster. And you had all these criminal organizations, Irish organizations, Italian organizations, etc., Irish Catholics, Jewish mobsters as well, all these different white collectives, and then also the white populace, the population, who were serious consumers and wouldn't give it up. Apparently, they don't know how to have a good time without being drunk, being under the influence of substance. So as a result, though prohibition was pushed by the government, the pushback by the people, that is to say, the populace, the majority, the evil whites, was such that prohibition was repealed. And so at that point, we saw a transition from righteous whites to evil whites running the American government. That was some time ago. So it lets you know that even among the whites, they were not all in agreement on what is right, what is wrong. And there were the good among that collective and the bad among that collective. The same is probably true of the blacks, right? You have blacks that are upright and decent, and then you have blacks that are extremely ratchet, covered in tattoos, have no decency, are gang members and on Section 8 and all the rest of it. But anyways, I was going through this logic, and a young lady says to me, she says, well, Mark, well, what about slavery? There's actually a white woman. She says, well, what about slavery? That was before prohibition, right? Aren't those bad whites or evil whites? I say, "No, not quite, actually, in as much as if slavery was, if it came back, I'd probably go ahead and get me a couple slaves, presuming that it wasn't on the basis of race, but rather on some other reasonable criteria, like you being lazy and not being able to display significant competence, skills, and ambition that would allow you to be a contribution to society. There's a number of people right now I can think of enslaving that would definitely be, suitable for the job. Some of them are influencers. But anyways, I said, no, those might be just the ambitious whites. I say, I don't really know that those are necessarily the evil whites until it comes to the dirty business of forcing the blacks to work, when you get to the whipping and all of that piece. Walk with me here, walk with me. You might be saying, Mark, this sounds terrible. What do you mean? Like, these are not the evil whites if they're enslaving people? Well, enslavement on the basis of race, I think, is a bad idea. I think it's a terrible thing. It's really just not logical. It's racist, and racism is an irrational thing for most people who practice it. But the fact of the matter is that every group has an in group and an out group. The in group are the people who are like us. The out group are the people who are not like us. So to enslave the people in the out group is fine. They're not like you. They're not of your culture. They're not the same as you. So you couldn't necessarily say that these people are evil because they did X, Y, and Z to the out group, because there's always a level of scarcity on the planet Earth. Not everyone gets to have all things. So some things you take for yourself or you take for your group and you deny the other group. Or if you want to build an empire, you do it a lot faster with slave labor. This is not a new thing, even in the ancient world. When I say ancient, we're talking about Europeans by European standards, which is not that ancient. But you had the Spartans and the Greeks who had helots. They would make slaves of POWs, fellow Greeks, other Europeans. You know that the Eastern Europeans were also made slaves of by other whites or Europeans, if you will. And so what you do to the out group, I can't necessarily judge that as an immoral thing because it's the out group. Now, when you do it to the in group, meaning people you actually identify with, well, then that's when we say, okay, that's problematic. These people are bad people. You see, with the prohibition example, it's really impactful because these were white Americans trying to protect mostly white Americans from themselves, from doing harm to the self. Whereas if you look at enslavement, you had white Americans or white Europeans, British, whomever, and they were saying, oh, well, these blacks are subhumans, they're inferior, they're nothing like us, they're not us, we'll do whatever we want to them. That's radically different than, making those who are like you suffer. So anyways, I say that to say, I think prohibition is a meaningful turning point in American culture where we see the forces of evil grow to dominate and certainly be pushed out of government and out of the halls of power. So I say all that to say, we know that government for a long time has been in the hands of the wicked. And the question is, whether it's a Kamala Harris presidency, it's a Donald Trump presidency, it's a fill in the blank presidency. Well, how is your life best lived? How do you achieve happiness? How do you have economic sustainability? How do you keep the dollar within your community? And I realized that we're dealing with such low levels of intelligence, and families have broken down so badly that knowledge is not passed on. people today don't even know what a community is. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second.